Our next speaker is Kate Smurthwaite, who is a comedian and activist. She's National Vice Chair of Abortion Rights UK, one of the writers of The Revolution Will Be Televised, UK's leading political satire, and was recently on the panel of Question Time. Somebody had to do it, I guess. And I'll hand over to Kate to entertain us.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello. So you've had lots of serious speakers, so I apologise in advance that I'm going to be silly and jokey, and I might make a few good points, but they might be couched in some silliness. This morning, because it was International Women's Day, I went to a protest, and I was walking through Parliament Square with my megaphone because I've got one. And this is true. A policeman stopped me and said, "Excuse me, madam, could you please tell me why you're carrying a megaphone in Parliament Square?" And I said, "Yeah, my iPhone's broken." And what is quite weird is that he nodded and I kept walking, so that's okay. Apparently that's the right answer. I have this very, very strange job where I do stand-up for a living. And then the other thing I do for a living is kind of go on TV and radio, debate shows, and argue with idiots. I wasn't at school and the careers officer said, "Kate, we noticed you called the CDT teacher a twat. Would you like to go on Question Time?" It didn't start like that. I don't know how it started. It just kind of started. It's basically what happens is about once a week, the BBC call me up and they say, "Hi, Kate, we've got a racist in the studio. Would you like to shout at them?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, sure." You know, they really mix it up. Sometimes it's a racist, sometimes it's a sexist, sometimes it's a homophobe, and sometimes it's not even Jeremy Clarkson. And I was on Question Time at the end of January. It's too recent for me to have written some huge routine about it. But I'll tell you two things about it. Firstly, when you go on Question Time, everyone on Twitter talks about you, and they have to start hashtags. I don't know if this event has a hashtag, but the sort of subject matter hashtag. And the people who agreed with the things I was saying, calling out Ken Clark and his cronies, people who agreed with me started the hashtag Kate Smurthwaite 4PM, which was very lovely and very sweet. And the people who disagreed with me and didn't like what I was saying, they also started a hashtag. And I don't know what it means. So if anyone does know, please let me know. But the people who didn't like me had the hashtag Lefty Cockwomble. Literally, if anyone knows, if that's some weird sexual practice I don't know about, I just feel like I'm a little bit behind the curve on these things. I only recently found out what a vajazzle was. I suppose some of you look confused in answer to your first two questions. Number one, they rip all your pubes out and put some glitter on instead. And number two, yes, seriously, about £50. Oh yeah, that's the ladies' version. There is a men's version as well, which is called a penazzle. It should obviously be called decoration. And then you can get matching disco balls. Anyway, I get distracted with silliness. I guess one of the things I've really enjoyed I've been here most of the day and I've heard most of the speakers, and one thing that really pleased me, I knew that we were going to talk about Thatcher, about Margaret Thatcher, and I have to say, actually, I kind of think there's something rather fitting about having an annual day every year in memory of Margaret Thatcher where nobody goes to work. But I'm really pleased that no one has gone down that route that unfortunately I hear so often in left-wing meetings where Thatcher is attacked and then suddenly we're attacking her for being unattractive. And you get that sort of shift where suddenly you go, "Oh, she was awful, wasn't she?" And then people suddenly slip into criticising famous women on all sides of the political spectrum because they don't look right or they don't fit some idea about what's sexy and what isn't. And then, you know, I didn't at any point during the 80s, even though I was quite small at the time, I don't remember Arthur Scargill saying, "I'm very angry about the collieries, but I still would." I don't think that was the point. And one of the people who I think gets it a lot, actually, I think unfairly, is Anne Widdecombe. You know, she gets so much criticism for what she looks like, and I think that's a complete mistake. There are much, much better reasons to hate Anne Widdecombe than what she looks like, aren't there? You've probably all got your own. My personal reason is a documentary she made about prostitution. I don't know if anybody saw it, but she genuinely made an hour-long documentary about prostitution, at the end of which she concluded that the problem with prostitution is that it can really affect house prices. And there is this amazing scene where we see, in this documentary, we see a young woman stood on a street corner, and we're led to believe, on the basis of rather little evidence, to be honest, that this woman is working as a prostitute or being forced to work as a prostitute. We don't know anything, to be honest, about her. All we know is there's a young woman stood on a street corner, and a white, unmarked van pulls up, and Anne Widdecombe leaps out with a running cameraman behind her, and they head towards this young woman. And this young woman, perhaps unsurprisingly, starts to run away. And as she does so, Anne Widdecombe, realising no interview is going to happen, shouts after her the following: "Why don't you go to university?" Okay, good. That is how badly she doesn't get it. Good. Yes, although this is the thing, I spend a lot of time defending people like Anne Widdecombe, saying she shouldn't be criticised for what she looks like, she should be criticised for her policies and her support for corrupt policy and bad politics and bad manifesto making and all this kind of stuff. And then last year, live on Radio 2, Anne Widdecombe called me a battle axe. I sort of wonder why I bother, to be honest. Now, on that subject, what I'm really interested in is the way that these issues are covered in the media, and I think that that's very relevant to what we've got going on here. It's very relevant to another aspect of the things that I do. I teach English every week to a group of asylum seekers, and that's exactly the issue that we're constantly up against. It's the huge disparity between the reality of these women's lives and the way that they're portrayed in the media. And so I'm kind of always keeping an eye on the media, and it's a bit distracting. I don't know if you're the same, but I wake up and I think I'm having a good day, and I just something in me goes, "You're not angry enough. Look at the Daily Mail website." And then sadly sometimes I get distracted, and I do. And so I brought a couple of. This is a Melanie Phillips article. I like panto noises. They're welcome. Yeah. This is a Melanie Phillips article that I picked up, and she does make me very angry, but just so you know, that's red wine, not blood. It's called "The Real Reason Our Hospitals Are a Disgrace," which is quite, you can almost hear her stamping her foot as she said it. And I'm sure there are people here who work in the health service, and I'm sure you and perhaps lots of the people here who've used the health service have got some really good ideas on how we can improve the health service. I've got one. Fund it. Very much. Let's see what Melanie Phillips thinks the problem is. The presumption of care has been systematically eroded by modern feminism. I don't know about the other women in the room, but I sort of feel like I might have missed a meeting. I was there, we've got to deal with the pay gap and rape culture. What? I had the afternoon off. We decided to fuck the health service, did we? But I've got to be fair to Melanie Phillips. Let's find out why she's unhappy with the health service. Well, it turns out that her mum went to hospital and she wasn't happy with the treatment her mum got. And a part of me thinks that's got to be legitimate, right? Maybe she was kept waiting. Maybe she was given the wrong medication. Of course she's upset if that's what happened. What happened to Melanie Phillips' mum? She was addressed discourteously. I'm guessing that was the gynecologist. Going, "I'm not touching your vagina. Melanie Phillips has been in there." Good. This is what I think. This is what I consider to be the worst Daily Mail article of all time in my experience. And I should preface this by saying that people think I hate men because I don't wax. But I'm going to tell you that this article was written by a man, and I think that makes it slightly worse. But you be the judge. Here's the title. Put away the roadmap, lads. Scientists present new proof that women can climax through intercourse alone. That is a man explaining to us all, because we needed the help, didn't we, ladies? We needed the help. how female orgasm works. I want to read 2 paragraphs from it. Before I do, and I'll come around to explain this, I'm going to tell you my favourite thing that happened at the Edinburgh Fringe last year. Last year I did a show in a pub called the Cannons Gate, and you might have heard of it actually, because it's the pub where Nigel Farage got booed out of the pub. It's that pub, and that's where I did my show last year, and he got booed out, and then he said, it's just discrimination against the English, and the people who did it said, oh no, we are English, we just think you're a twat. And it was rather lovely. And I was doing a show in that pub, and I guess the downstairs room in that pub, it's probably a little bit smaller than this room, but it's probably had the same number of people in it. And the only thing I really need to explain is there's a little stage at the front, and just in front of it, there's quite a low beam. Now, I'm 5'7", I'm all right, but any comedian who's 6 foot tall, you can't see their head, and it becomes kind of like a radio show. So I'm on stage, and I'm chatting away with the audience, and I spoke to a man in the audience, I guess sat about where you are, if you don't mind me, you don't have to do any impressions or anything, or say anything, sat about where you are, and he was a huge guy, shaved head, very, very muscular guy, tattoos, and I asked him what he did for a living, and he told me that he was a bouncer in Glasgow. Yeah, and there was a sort of moment where we all went, tough job, tough job. And I said this to him, and we had a bit of a laugh. And then I introduced the next comedian, who's a very tall Canadian comic. And immediately, we couldn't see his head. So we all started to giggle, right? And he realised there was a problem. And I thought he had 2 choices, right? He could have stepped off the stage. That would have lowered his height a little bit. Or he could have stepped back a bit further on the stage to improve the visibility. But for a reason I don't really understand, he chose to do something else. He did this. Right, and the thing is, right, this is kind of a weird thing to do, but it kind of does solve the problem, right? If my head wasn't visible, this solves the problem. Now it's a perfectly good solution to the problem for everybody in the room, except the person in this chair here, who's now got a rather awkward eye line right into my groin. And so I've now got this massive Glaswegian bouncer, and all he can see is the Canadian comedian's crotch, literally. But this comedian is a professional, right? So he noticed the problem, and he said, this is awkward, and we laughed. He said, it feels like we're about to kiss, and we laughed again. And he said, it'll be our first gay experience. And the bouncer went, yours. Yeah, and it made me so happy. So the point of that, obviously, is that you can't and shouldn't assume that everybody's straight. That would be a very, very foolish thing to do. Something that I probably don't need to say in Brighton, if I'm fair. But that would be a very foolish thing to do. Needless to say, the Daily Mail is about to. So I'll give you 2 sentences of this Daily Mail article in which a man explains how female orgasm works. For decades, I don't know if any of the other people in the room can explain what happened before decades, but for decades, it has been thought that the clitoris is the only key to a woman's sexual satisfaction. This meant men who wanted to satisfy their partners believed that they must spend hours God, I'm sorry, I had no idea it was such a chore. They must spend hours. I don't know what normally happens after these events, but if there is some sort of after party and we all end up having sex and the hours seem to be grinding on, just let me know. I'm always willing to take a break, you know. Believe they must spend hours getting to know the little button-like organ and determining its location. Sounds so disgusting. But I like to think that I'm an informative kind of comedian and a generous lover. So just cutting from the comedy, just quick public service announcement for the benefit of any Daily Mail readers who are in. It's in the middle at the front. Yes, yes, I would love to talk about Daily Mail and stupid articles I dig up all the time. I will move on to one other thing that I want to talk about before we move on to the next speakers. And that is this, is that I have this weird job where I go on and I've been on This Morning arguing with Nadine Dorries and all these kind of things, and I do these debates and I come and talk at events like this and I love it. The downside of my job is this, and this is quite a sort of intimate room to share this in, but as a result of what I do for a living, I get a lot of death threats. And like, first of all, it's okay, they're not doing very well. To be honest, if you do want to kill me, probably the worst idea is to send me a lengthy email explaining when and how. Probably be much better off to just invite me to a sort of apparently pleasant-sounding event in Brighton and maybe lurk in the gallery or something, and that would be a good time to sort that out. It's really scary, and I don't want to belittle how scary it can be, but what I find kind of interesting is how quickly you get used to it. Like how quickly you become immune to it. And I think in a way, what I'm saying maybe overlaps with some of what Adriana was saying, that when we come up against these things that are intended to make us weaker, quite often we actually develop a resilience to them. And I realised recently that I've been living like this for so long that I now have a favourite death threat. So I'm going to share it with you. This is a genuine YouTube message that I received, and it said this. It said, "I don't care what you say. I am going to rip the flesh from your bones." Now, I think he does care what I say. Because ripping flesh from bones is a very enthusiastic way to show apathy, isn't it? And then he starts to get out of the normal range. He says this, he says, "I have done this before." And you're thinking, that needs backup, but don't worry, it's coming. He says, "I was responsible for Michael Jackson's death." And the last sentence is this, quite sinister. It says, "Not fucking around. You will die. 4th April 2014. So that's certainly simplified my Easter plans. But it also raises, doesn't it, rather an interesting, rather subtle question. Maybe you can think about this in your life, right? Answering this question. Have you ever been so angry, so livid, so sort of boiling with rage, that you wanted to rip the flesh from someone's bones, but you're a bit busy till April? You've missed the boat, she's already dead, but well done.
I wish I'd have done it earlier,
To me, that's a guy who doesn't know how to write a to-do list, isn't it? It's just somebody who's got that. Now, before I'll wrap up in a minute. Before I do, I just was going to say that I have a solo show that I did at the Edinburgh Fringe last year. I mean, I do a new one every year, and this solo show is called My Professional Opinion, and it's about going on these shows and arguing. It's also about how we form opinions and how it can influence others. And I won an award for it in Edinburgh, and I'm bringing it to Brighton 16th to 18th of May. And it's at a venue called 3 and 10, which local people know, which is it's down on the seafront and it's upstairs in a nice little pub. But 3 and 10, that's in old-fashioned money or something, if that's an easy way to remember it. You'll all be looking for 2 and 6 now, but anyway. It's there, it's 3 nights at 10 o'clock, and I would love it if you come along. David Dimbleby told me that he is going to come along, and it's quite a small venue, so there's a good chance you'll be sat next to David Dimbleby and maybe he'll show you his tattoo or something. The other thing I forgot to tell you is when I was on Question Time. This is really weird, right? When I was on Question Time, you get an email from the production company giving you all the timings and everything. And I've got this email. I can prove this to you. At the end of it says, "After the recording, David Dimbleby and the production team would like to invite you and a guest to join them for a hot fork buffet." That is like the dirtiest sounding meal I've ever heard of. There's no way they could make that more sexual. But perhaps that's what I'll be doing after my show at 3 and 10. So I'd love it if you would come along. I'll finish with one very silly thing. I do all these serious shows and arguing with serious people, and then sometimes I get to be on something very silly. And last year I was on a very silly, frankly rubbish reality TV show that you may have heard of called The Bachelor. Does anyone know The Bachelor? You see, those of you, you're nodding, but those of you shaking your head, I actually respect you more. It really is a terrible show, as you'll, I'm sure, agree with me. If you haven't seen it, they get this eligible bachelor, and then they get these women to compete to go out with him. That's the premise of the show. And I wasn't one of the women, by the way, I'm far too old for that. They did an episode where the women put on a comedy show to impress this guy, and although I think the structure of the show is rather unpleasant, although in fairness there is also another version called The Bachelorette where the boys compete to go out with the girls, I don't really understand the whole thing. I thought I quite like the idea of these women putting on a comedy show to impress this guy, because it's felt to me like a kind of two fingers up to all those TV production companies that can put on 7 straight white male comedians week in and week out and never get round to answering a fucking email I send them. So, this whole sexism in comedy thing, I mean, it's an old problem, but it's actually a really huge new resurgence, you know. I've never heard anybody say this about Lucille Ball, which she was somehow coping or dealing with. It's just this whole idea that comedy is for men and by men, and it's full of sexist humour. And it's become so saturated. I'm like, this is not funny, I'm just ranting now. It's become so saturated in our culture that these days, if you want to start a brand new TV channel 100% dedicated to showing comedy shows, classic comedy, new comedy shows and modern comedy shows, you can communicate what you are going to do to the entire population of this country simply by calling that channel Dave. Now, I was on The Bachelor, and all of that is an unnecessary justification. The reality is that they were filming it in the south of France. I would probably have shit in a bag for the free holiday. I spent a week in the south of France getting drunk with a bloke called Tony, who makes reality TV shows. And he's worked on Big Brother and The Apprentice and all sorts of shows. And I'm pretty sure you would do what I did, actually. You'd have a couple of the free drinks, and then you'd ask him about some of the shows he wanted to make that got rejected. And this one show, I think we have to get the next fundraiser round, dig a deep, we have to make this show. Tony wants to make a show where we take senior level, high-ranking police officers and get them to spend a week sleeping on the streets homeless. Yeah, isn't that fascinating? They'd find out what it's like to be ignored and abused and hassled, and very often moved along and have their lives made difficult by the police themselves. I would definitely watch that show. I think that'd be a fascinating piece of social documentary. I wouldn't even call it reality TV. I would definitely watch it. But mostly, I'd watch that show because Tony wants to call the show Pigs in Blankets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That was interesting on a whole number of levels.